This summer, thousands of demonstrators from European countries have been marching and chanting slogans such as "Crush Israel," "Jews are the new Nazis," "For world peace, Israel must be destroyed," "Jihad is the only solution for Israel." And then notice the Israeli and American flags being burned together. England is reporting a 50% increase in anti-Semitic acts, with more than 100 hate crimes occurring just this past month. 1/3 of European Jews no longer wear religious attire and no longer exhibit Jewish symbols in public. Another 1/4 of them avoid Jewish events and avoid Jewish venues altogether, because anti-Semitism is such an increasing and serious threat. But the current epicenter of anti-Semitism is located on a small piece of Middle Eastern real estate called Gaza. I hope you can see it here, this little strip. This is Gaza. Gaza is a narrow coastal section of land beside the Mediterranean Sea. It borders Egypt on the southwest and Israel on the north and east. It consists of only 141 square miles, so it's an extremely small geographical region. Since 2007, an organization called Hamas has governed Gaza. Hamas claims to represent the Palestinian National Authority and the Palestinian people themselves. Hamas is an offshoot from the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood and is a Palestinian Sunni Islamic organization committed to liberating Palestine from all Israeli occupation and then establishing an autonomous Islamic state in an area that covers present-day Israel, the West Bank, and the Gaza Strip. Hamas is considered a terrorist organization according to Israel, the United States, United Kingdom, European Union, Egypt, Jordan, Japan, and Australia. Countries that do not consider Hamas to be terrorist are Iran, Russia, China, Turkey, and other Islamic Arab nations. The Hamas charter states, quote, "Our struggle against the Jews is very great and very serious." And that document that has not changed one word since its creation in 1988, that document calls for Israel's extinction as a political state and the eventual creation of this Islamic state in Palestine. In fact, Hamas co-founder Mahmoud al-Zahar said he dreamed of hanging a huge map of the world on the wall at his Gaza home and Israel not being on it. That charter describes the Hamas attitude toward Jewish people. And that document reads, "The time will not come until Muslims will fight the Jews and kill them, until the Jews hide behind rocks and trees, and which, meaning those rocks and trees, will cry out, 'O Muslim, there is a Jew hiding behind me. Come and kill him.'" Understand something right up front. Hamas wants all Jews dead. It's just as simple as that. Hamas is committed to global Jewish genocide. Gaza has a total population of 1.8 million Palestinians, and 1 million of them, more than 1/2 of them, are UN-registered refugees. Most of that population is Sunni Muslims, and only 2,000 to 3,000 are Arab Christians. Israel governed Gaza from 1967 until 2005. But under tremendous international pressure in 2005, Israel retreated from Gaza. Israel completely turned its administration over to the Palestinian authorities. That meant that all the Jewish settlements in Gaza were disbanded, and its Jewish residents were forcibly removed. That meant the sizable Israeli agricultural, commercial, and residential assets in Gaza were all left to the Palestinians. Israel pulled out its military presence from Gaza and turned every square inch of Gaza over to the Palestinians. Gaza was no longer an Israeli occupied region, and contrary to the misinformed media, Gaza is still an unoccupied region. In order to help the Gaza economic struggles, at that time, Israel gave the Palestinians its 3,000 greenhouses that had produced fruit and flowers for export. It opened border crossings and encouraged commerce. Israel wanted this new Palestinian state to succeed. The idea behind this move was to establish a model for a two-state arrangement. One state being Israeli and one state being Palestinian, and for those states to coexist side by side in peace. But Hamas doesn't want a two-state solution to the Mideast problem. The Hamas charter refuses to recognize Israel's right to exist as a political state. Hamas wants Israel annihilated and wants the establishment of a singular Islamic Palestinian state. In 2005, Israel literally handed the Palestinians this incredible chance to develop Gaza into the Hong Kong of the Mediterranean. Other nations recognized that potential and invested billions of dollars into Gaza to help the Palestinians succeed. Question: how did the Palestinians in Gaza react to this incredible gift from the Israelis? This is what happened. The Palestinians demolished those greenhouses and then elected Hamas to govern them. And instead of building an independent state with political and economic institutions, Hamas turned Gaza into a massive military terrorist state and engaged the Palestinian people in continuous war against Israel. Under Hamas, the Palestinians trashed the assets left to them from Israel and used the other foreign funds to purchase weapons and munitions in order to finance terrorism. The Palestinian authorities didn't even pretend to build a strong infrastructure that would enable the residents of Gaza to support themselves. That's the reason most Palestinians can only find employment in Israel, because there aren't enough job opportunities in Gaza. Unemployment in Gaza is 41%. And this all happened because most of the economic development monies sent into Gaza have been put into terrorism against Israel. Then, to demonstrate Hamas's hypocrisy, the Palestinian people are trapped in poverty that Hamas has caused them. The Palestinian people are terrified of becoming collateral damage from Israel's retaliation, something that Hamas has caused them. And all the time, the Hamas head, Khalid Mashal, has been ruling Gaza from a luxurious hotel in Qatar. Hamas overcharges for basic goods smuggled into Gaza. Some 800 millionaires and 1,600 millionaires now control the tunnels where the goods are being smuggled, and does so at the expense of starving Palestinians. Since 2007, Hamas authorities have fired off thousands and thousands of rockets and mortars indiscriminately into the nation of Israel. More than 4,000 and counting just this summer. And now, because of technical advances funded from Iran, Hamas rockets now have a much longer range before impact and then explosion. That means that most of Israel is now in danger of unannounced rocket fire. 80% of Israelis have spent time in bomb shelters, including my niece Katie, who was there this summer on a UCLA archaeological dig. No other nation would have been as patient. No other nation would have waited as long as Israel has at different times to defend itself. And Israel has been persistent in warning Palestinians of incoming airstrikes. Israel's war, do not miss this, Israel's war is against Hamas, not Palestinians. Palestinians are most often innocents in this fight. And Palestinians, I'm reading, are becoming more and more irritated and angered at Hamas. So Israel has gone to extraordinary lengths to avoid Palestinian civilian casualties. Israel's defensive forces have dropped thousands of leaflets, sent thousands of emails, and made telephone calls encouraging Palestinians, please evacuate the areas that Israel has targeted. But Hamas has used Palestinians, these innocents, as human shields, and has insisted that these people stay put. And as a result, there have been substantial Palestinian civilian casualties. Israel's prime minister, a man I have great respect for, Benjamin Netanyahu, an outstanding man, summarized the difference between Israel and Hamas and said, quote, Israel is using our missile defense to protect our citizens. Hamas is using its citizens to protect its missiles. I might interject a footnote. Some in the media see a moral equivalency between Israel and Hamas. That, pardon me, is insane. This most recent war started after Palestinian extremists abducted and murdered 3 Israeli teenagers. And then in revenge, some rogue Israelis murdered an innocent Palestinian teenager. And that was wrong. Categorically, unequivocally wrong. Now here's the difference. Hamas has commended and praised the abductors and murderers of those Israeli teenagers. And Israel has condemned the murder of that Palestinian teenager and has since arrested 3 Israelis as suspects, and if found guilty will be punished to the fullest extent of the law. So is that moral equivalence? No, I don't think so. Did you know that during this recent conflict, Israel has sent more than 1,000 trucks containing food, fuel, and medical supplies to the Palestinian people? Did you know that the Israeli Defensive Forces have set up a field hospital at a border crossing in order to treat wounded Palestinians? But the United Nations and other critics throughout our media have said that Israel's response to Hamas has not been proportionate. According to them, it has been disproportionate, meaning that Israel has caused more casualties than she has suffered. That's the reason our Secretary of State has, been naive to urge Israel to exercise restraint in responding to Hamas. I'm not a huge Michael Bloomberg fan per se, but he said something I wish more people understood. He said, quote, proportionalism is for theorists. Governments are responsible to protect their people with everything they have. There is no such thing as proportionate response to terrorism. There is no such thing as proportionate response to terrorism, and there isn't. In Gaza, Hamas terrorists hide in school classrooms and hospital basements, store weapons in Islamic mosques, and use university laboratories for bomb-making factories. Hamas hides long-range missiles in the basement of Gaza's hospitals. Hamas has intentionally placed men and women on rooftops of buildings that Hamas knows are going to be targets of the Israeli Air Force. This is not just political rumor mongering. Recently, the Israeli military force captured a Hamas manual on urban warfare. That manual brags about the propaganda value of innocent Palestinian casualties and even admits that the Israeli armed forces take extraordinary precautions to limit the collateral damage done to civilians. Hamas wants Palestinian civilians to die in order to be a public relations piece to turn other nations against Israel. This practice of using human shields is a recognized war crime. Troops hiding in and among civilian population centers is a recognized war crime. Launching rockets from civilian neighborhoods is a recognized war crime. Using children as combatants is a recognized war crime. Firing rockets and mortars into civilian population centers that have no military connections is also a recognized war crime. But these war crimes are committed all the time on the part of Hamas. And the United Nations and the international community just turns its head and ignores it. It's all part of the propaganda assault against Israel. Because after those human shields have been wounded or die, then the media announces that those casualties are, quote, innocent victims of Israeli aggression. This not so subtle aim is to deceive Israel into unintentionally killing civilians in order to bring about international pressure to end the Israeli operation. And that's what's happened. Other nations have piled on and insisted that Israel create a ceasefire agreement between themselves and Hamas. But each agreement between Israel and Hamas has only been temporary because Hamas, not Israel, Hamas continues to violate the agreements again and again and again and again and resume its terrorist activities against a people group that are guilty of nothing other than existing. That's Israel's crime against humanity. Existing. All right? That's the introduction. That brings up an important question. Who is a Jew? Who is a Jewish person? What constitutes Jewishness? In a general statement, a Jewish person is a member of an ethno-religious group that originated from the ancient Israelites in the Middle East. A Jewish person is a member of an ethno-religious group that originated from the ancient Israelites in the Middle East. But in more specific language, someone can be defined as Jewish if he or she meets one of three criteria. A person can be Jewish if someone is born Jewish. If that person practices Judaism or not is irrelevant, as long as that person is genetically from Jewish descent. I might have mentioned before, I spent my entire grade school in a dominant Jewish area. And all my friends, all of them were Jewish. Might add, all of them were rich. Not sure how I got into that neighborhood. A person might be Jewish if someone has at least some Jewish ancestral background. Example, someone's mother might be Jewish, but not his father. But that's enough to be considered Jewish. Third, someone might be Jewish if he has no Jewish ancestral background, but he has converted to Judaism. That's called a Jewish proselyte. People are sometimes proselytized or converted to Judaism. I understand Sammy Davis Jr. was thought to be a Jewish proselyte. Israel is the only Jewish state in existence. And that word Israel can be a reference to both the actual geographical land Israel now occupies, or the word Israel can be a reference to the entire Israeli population that exists as a nation. It is used in both senses. Now, based on these basic definitions, throughout this message, let me expound on some important reasons the United States as a nation and individual Christians as we are should support, should stand beside, should stand behind, and should pray for the Jewish people and pray for the Jewish nation of Israel, and especially during this recent and continuing conflict in Gaza. These are 4 reasons. Reason 1, to be pro-Israel, is because Israel is the most frequently mentioned subject in the Bible next to God Himself. Israel is the most frequently mentioned subject in the entire Bible next to God Himself. God used 40 different men to record 66 different books that constitute the Scriptures. All of those men were Jewish, except possibly one. And that one exception was probably Luke, the medical doctor, who authored the Gospel of Luke and its sequel, the book of Acts. Since the Bible is basically a Jewish book, it shouldn't surprise us that it mentions Israel a total of 2,566 times. Someone has estimated that 83% of the Bible is directly related to Israel. The Bible is essentially a Jewish book, both Old and New Testaments. And I might add, Christianity is a fulfillment of ancient Judaism. Reason 2, because God has chosen Israel to be special, more so than all the other nations. God has chosen Israel to be special, more so than all the other nations. Deuteronomy 7 verse 6. Notice, for you, meaning the Jewish people that together constituted the ancient nation of Israel, for you are a holy people to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for himself. Now notice, a special treasure above all the peoples on the face of the earth. Both the United States and Israel each have a Jewish population of about 6 million people. The total global Jewish population is estimated to be just under 14 million people. Now think through that and do the math. That 14 million people on a global scale, that total Jewish population represents only 0.2% of the total global human population. 0.2% of the total human population on earth. It is amazing to me that so much media attention is devoted to such a small, minuscule people group. Why is that? That is because the Jewish people are a special people. God created them as such. One example of that specialness is the number of Nobel Prizes awarded to Jewish people versus those Nobel laureates from other people groups. From 1901 until this morning, 855 Nobel Prizes have been given to different individuals in recognition of significant contributions to mankind. Economics, physics, chemistry, literature, medicine, and peace. Of that total number of Nobel Prizes, 193 of them have been awarded to Jewish people. That is an astronomically high percentage. Remember, out of the more than 7 billion people on this earth, only 0.2% of them are Jewish. But that minuscule percentage of the total human population has earned and won more than 22% of all the Nobel Prizes to date. Jewish people are special people. And the ultimate example of that specialness is a man named Jesus Christ. If Jewish people, think through this, if the Jewish people weren't special to God above all other people, then why did God choose to send his Son to earth in human form as a Jewish man? Yasser Arafat, now deceased, was chairman of the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. He was totally corrupt. He didn't care about Palestinians, he cared about himself. He actually stole Palestinian funds to become a billionaire before his death. He fought Israel his entire career. And Arafat once made the ridiculous statement that Jesus was not Jewish. According to Arafat, Jesus was Palestinian. People, that's not possible. Jesus is the only Jewish person alive that can document his Jewish ancestors. All the ancient Jewish genealogical records housed and stored in the Jerusalem temple were completely destroyed after General Titus from Rome invaded Jerusalem in 70 AD. No Jew alive today can prove his Jewishness other than Jesus. Because Jesus is the only Jew that still has access to his genealogical records. And those genealogical records are found in Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 through 17, and Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38. Read it sometime. God the Father incarnated his one and only unique Son, Jesus, in the form of a Jewish male. And he did that because Jewish people are that special to him. But some people argue that Jewish people are no longer that special. In theological language, that argument is called replacement theology. And that unfortunate teaching is becoming more and more accepted in evangelical Christianity. Even some popular evangelicals have bought into this idea. Modern-day apologists such as R.C. Sproul and Hank Hanegraaff. Popular authors John Piper, J.I. Packard, and Wayne Grudem. All good men. But mistaken about this subject. Replacement theology teaches that the church has replaced Israel in God's program. According to this teaching, because the Jewish nation, some 20 centuries ago, rejected Jesus as the promised Messiah, God canceled all the promises and blessings he had earlier made to the Jewish people. Replacement theology means that the Jewish people are no longer God's chosen people. The Jewish people are no longer God's covenant people. And that the prophecies and promised blessings that were made to ancient Israel are now being fulfilled in the church. The church is now said to be the new Israel. And again, some outstanding people accept this. I don't. The rebuttal to that teaching is too extensive for this message. But consider just one problem. There are 77 references, direct references to Israel in the New Testament. And none of them are referring to the church. If in those 77 New Testament references we substituted the word church for Israel in those verses, then those passages would instantly be rendered unreadable and nonsensical. One of the reasons, though, that this teaching is so dangerous is because some proponents of replacement theology tend to be less than enthusiastic about Israel. Some of them argue that Israel is just being a Middle Eastern bully. Replacement theological extremists or even anti-Semitic, as the famous Protestant reformer, unfortunately, Martin Luther was. I might interject a footnote here. The name Palestinian is confusing to this debate because there is no Palestinian language. There is no Palestinian culture. Until the 1967 war, the Palestinians were Arab Egyptians and Arab Jordanians. Palestinians are essentially Arabs. In fact, Palestinians are sometimes called Palestinian Arabs. The total Palestinian population worldwide is about 11 million people. And more than half of them are stateless and hold no citizenship in any country. It would seem that no one wants them. And I argue that's unfortunate. Reason 3, to be pro-Israel. Because God has identified himself with Israel. God has identified himself with Israel. The Bible refers to the phrase, Lord God of Israel, 108 times. The words, the God of Israel, are mentioned 203 times. And the phrase, the Holy One of Israel, is mentioned 31 times. Understand, the Bible never identifies God with any other nation on earth except Israel. That's not because Israel has always been more sensitive to God than other nations. At some times it has. At other times it hasn't. Throughout its history, Israel has often ignored God. Israel has even outright rejected God at different times. Sometimes ancient Israel actually invited paganism to infest the nation. And even now, a significant percentage of modern Israel's population are agnostic and atheistic and are not proponents of historic Judaism. Probably most Jews have left Judaism. But God still identifies himself with Israel. Reason 4. Reason 4 to be pro-Israel, because God has given Israel land that he calls his own land. God has given Israel land that he calls his own land. This fourth point presents a problem, because most of the political arguments about the land Israel occupies, those arguments we hear on and through the media, those arguments about the land either ignore, forget, or purposefully reject the fact that the God of Israel has given to the literal descendants from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob a special land. In fact, a land God calls his own land. Leviticus 25, verse 23. The land, this is the promised land, shall not be sold permanently, for the land is mine. Notice capital M, meaning this is God's land. For you, meaning the ancient Israelites, are strangers and sojourners with me, God said. Since the land is God's, he can allocate it to whomever he wants. And he has chosen to allocate that particular land to Abraham's descendants. This fourth point brings up what is called the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant. A covenant is itself an agreement between different parties. Some of us understand marriage itself is a mutual covenant between a man and a woman to become lifelong companions. There are two different categories of covenants: conditional covenants and unconditional covenants. Now, conditional covenants or bilateral covenants are agreements that are binding on both parties for its fulfillment. Both parties agree, covenant together to meet certain conditions. And if one of the parties doesn't meet their part of that agreement, then the covenant is broken and it is invalidated. Unconditional or unilateral covenants are agreements between two parties, but get this, only one of the parties is required to do something. The Abrahamic covenant is an unconditional, unilateral covenant. And that is specifically described in Genesis chapter 15, although we don't have time to go there now. That means, as an unconditional unilateral covenant, God made promises to Abraham that required nothing from Abraham. This was a commitment God made to Abraham, and Abraham was not obligated to commit anything in return. This was an unconditional agreement God made to the actual progenitor and father of the Jewish people. Now, the Abrahamic covenant is first mentioned in Genesis chapter 12. Genesis 12, the first three verses. Notice, verse 1. Now the Lord said to Abram, Abram is going to be changed to Abraham, same man. Get out from your country, from your family, and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. Verse 2, I will make you, Abraham, a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now notice through this covenant, God has promised Abraham four principal things. One, he promised him a great nation. Interesting enough, Abraham was 75 and childless at the point God promised him descendants. But it happened. Second, God promised him a great name. And the Jewish people have that, as does Israel. Third, God promised him to be a great blessing. Abraham's descendants, or Israel, would be a great blessing to all people on this earth. And fourth, God promised him a great land. God promised to Abraham and his Jewish descendants a land. This land was called the Promised Land because it was promised to Israel. Meaning God promised to Abraham and his descendants this land. He promised it to them and to no one else. And this divine promise is repeated again in Genesis 13, verses 14 through 18. It is important to notice that the specific dimensions of the land God promised to the Jewish people are mentioned. in Genesis 15, verses 18 to 21, and Ezekiel 48, verse 1 and verse 28. Genesis states that the land God promised them was to stretch from the Mediterranean Sea on the west to the Euphrates River on the east. Then Ezekiel fixes the northern border of the land at Hamath, 100 miles north of Damascus, and locates the southern border at Kadesh, about 100 miles south of Jerusalem. This slide illustrates the total land area God originally promised Abraham, that entire Mideast region. I might add, that area that we now understand to be Gaza is just a small, minuscule portion of the original land God promised to Abraham and his descendants. In a pure biblical sense, modern Israel was under no obligation to give Gaza to the Palestinians, because that land, Gaza, was part and parcel of the real estate package God promised to the Jewish nation. Now, please notice that the original promised land included much more area than what the present nation of Israel occupies. Do you see that? Can you see that? That's Israel. That's the land God promised them. Modern day Israel is only about the size of New Jersey. Please notice that the original promised land, as a result of the Abrahamic covenant, that original land mass included much, much more area than the present nation of Israel occupies. The difference between these maps is incredible if we compare the small tract of land Israel presently occupies to all of the land promised Israel per the Abrahamic covenant. Land that Israel does not now have, and land Israel has never had. If Israel today occupied all of the land promised to it through the Abrahamic covenant, then she would control all the land holdings of present-day Israel, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, the West Bank of Jordan, and substantial portions of Egypt, Syria, and Iraq. But that's not going to happen from my dispensational perspective. That's not going to happen until Jesus, the promised Messiah, returns to the earth and sets up his messianic kingdom. So for that reason, it doesn't bother me so much that Israel has turned Gaza over to the Palestinians. That doesn't bother me. Hamas is not what bothers me. Is what bothers me not the fact that Palestinians occupy that small coastal piece of land. Now, please notice that the land God promised to Abraham and his descendants was intended to be a permanent possession. Genesis 17, verse 7 and 8. And I, God, will establish my covenant between me and you, Abraham, and your descendants after you in their generations, for an everlasting covenant. How long is this covenant? Everlasting. That would be eternal. That would be permanent. Verse 8, also I give to you and your descendants after you the land in which you are a stranger, all the land of Canaan, as an everlasting possession. How long is that possession? Everlasting. There's no question but that God promised Abraham and his descendants the land of Canaan as their possession in perpetuity. But again, some of our evangelical friends that teach replacement theology suggest that this Genesis promise of a particular land is not to be interpreted in a literal sense. God is not speaking of actual land here. This is a metaphorical land. This land is just a symbolic reference to heaven. According to them, this land that God promised Abraham and his descendants should be interpreted as heaven. The promised land is heaven, according to them. But the text we read is just too specific to be symbolic of something else. Both passages from Genesis and Ezekiel describe the promised land in specific language. Both of them describe that land in plain, definitive, geographical boundaries. Former president of Dallas Theological Seminary, Dr. John Wolford, said this: the term land used in the Bible means exactly what it says. He has adopted a literal principle. Again, when normal sense makes good sense, sneak no other sense, or else we get nonsense. So he's applying the literal principle first to the text. The term land used in the Bible means exactly what it says. It is not talking about heaven. It is talking about a piece of real estate in the Middle East. This is an amazing argument. If God was just promising Abraham heaven, then he could have stayed in Ur of the Chaldees. Why should he get up and go on a long journey? Why should he be a pilgrim and a wanderer? No, God meant land. I agree. These biblical statements are a reference to an actual piece of dirt on this earth. Now, in conclusion, let me present 5 reasons that Israel has the divine right, I believe the divine right to its own land and the divine right to statehood as a nation. 1, the biblical reason. This is the principal reason and the one we just mentioned, but let me expand on that just some. Genesis 13, verses 17 and 18. God said to Abraham, "Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you." Verse 18, then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Notice, God had just repeated the Abrahamic covenant to Abraham. And notice, Abraham listened to what God had said, and Abraham acted on what God had said to him, and Abraham moved to the plain of Mamre in Hebron. Hebron is located in what we now know to be the West Bank. And that was considered to be a part of the land God had promised Abraham and his descendants. People, understand something. This is not a political issue as much as it is a biblical issue. Do we believe the Bible or not? Second reason, Israel has a divine right to exist as a nation. The archaeological reason. There has been extensive archaeological digs throughout the land that Israel occupies for decades. And each archaeological dig in Israel supports the fact that the Israelis have had a presence there on that land for more than 34 centuries. These archaeological digs have discovered coins, entire cities, pottery, houses, and different items of culture from the ancient Jewish people that had resided there throughout these centuries. It is true, we should admit, there were other ancient people groups that did exist in that region, and the ruins of those groups have been discovered. But it is still apparent from an archaeological perspective that the Jewish population has been present in that land for some 34 centuries, consecutive centuries. It actually predates the claims that other current peoples in that region might have. The ancient Philistines that predated the Israelites there are now extinct. Other ancient people groups that inhabited Canaan from that region that predated the Israelites there are also now extinct. No people group from that region has had continuous residential line to this date that the Israelis have. Nobody else. Dr. Doug Bookman, an Old Testament scholar, said the only people who have ever, as a people, called this land their native home were the Jews. The only time this land has ever had an internal government, as well as defined and defended boundaries, the only people who administered that government and defended those borders were the Jews. It is an archaeological fact. Third reason Israel has a divine right to this land is the historical reason. Israel has a historical right to the land. Apart from archaeological excavation, the secular historical record demonstrate that the Jewish people have had a presence in the promised land in this region of Palestine since General Joshua invaded the land in 1406 BC. Although not always as a self-governed people, At some point, Babylonians captured the land, and then Persians received it from the Babylonians, and then Greeks got it from the Persians, and then in 63 BC, the Romans confiscated it from the Greeks. But the Jews have always been there. In 135 AD, there was a mass exodus. Most, not all, as I said, because some Jewish people remained behind, but most Jewish residents at that time were driven out from Jerusalem and exiled. And then the land passed through a succession of rulers that included, again, the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Arabs, the British Crusaders, the Mamluks, the Turkish Ottoman Empire, and then Great Britain. But no matter who might have controlled the land, a remnant of Jewish people have always been present in Palestine. Jewish people have, from historical record, occupied Palestine on a continuous basis since the time of Joshua. In more modern times, the Turkish people under the Ottoman Empire ruled the land up until World War I, and then the land was conquered by the British. In time, Great Britain promised to give control of the land that we call Palestine to the Jewish people. And in the beginning, this is interesting, in the beginning, there was some Arab support to do that. The reason there was some Arab encouragement to assign a homeland to the Jewish people was because at that time there wasn't a significant Arab population in Palestine. The fact is the land was not in a good condition. The land was not in a condition that could sustain a large population base. It was not developed enough to handle large numbers of people, and no one seemed to want the land other than the Jewish people. It was considered to be basically worthless. Example, Mark Twain took a tour of Palestine in 1867. And this is how he described that land we now call Israel. It is a desolate country whose soil is rich enough, but is given over wholly to weeds, a silent, mournful expanse. We never saw a human being on the whole route. There was hardly a tree or a shrub anywhere. Even the olive and the cactus, whose fast friends of a worthless soil had almost deserted the country. So question. That's what Mark Twain said. So where was this great, thriving Palestinian nation the media talks about on that land? It wasn't there, people, because it didn't exist. The Palestinians weren't there. Palestine had been under the domination of the Turkish Ottoman Empire until the British captured it. But during that time, there weren't many people there because the land couldn't support them. Earlier on, the French author Voltaire, no friend of Christianity, Voltaire described Palestine as, quote, a hopeless, dreary place. Listen to this report from the British-created Palestinian Royal Commission. It quotes an account of the conditions on the coastal plain along the Mediterranean Sea, the border of Israel, in 1913. That commission said, quote, the road leading from Gaza to the north was only a summer track, suitable for transport by camels or carts. No orange groves, orchards, or vineyards were to be seen until one reached the Yonev village. Houses were mud. Schools did not exist. The western part toward the sea was almost a desert. The villages in this area were few and thinly populated. Many villages were deserted by their inhabitants. And that was in 1913. In short, under Turkish Ottoman control, this entire region suffered from gross neglect and a small population base, and that, people, is a historical fact. But things changed. After the British permitted the Jewish people to move back, after the British gave the Jewish people permission to immigrate into Palestine and reclaim the land, that region became populated again by both Jewish people and Arabs. But only because the land had started to prosper again once the Jewish people returned and once those Jewish people started to restore the land. How many of you in this room have visited Israel? Would you not agree with me? And I know Larry works for an Israeli company based out of Israel, and he's been there, I know, for his work. And others of you have been there as tourists. But would you not agree with me? Could you not document from personal experience some of the incredible things the Israelis have done to that once barren and desolate land? I mean, I heard I heard Joan Rivers, not my favorite. Joan Rivers went on this, she was asked about Hamas and Israel, and she was extremely pro-Israel, and she said, just go to Israel. She said, that place is amazing, what those people have done. And it is. It wasn't like that before they were permitted to move back. That's one reason the Palestinians have had such an interest in the land now that it's had this resurgence. Israel gained its independence and statehood in 1948. But the other nations in that Middle Eastern region also came into existence, most people don't know this, around that same time frame. Saudi Arabia was not created until 1932. Lebanon, 1943. Iraq did not exist as a nation until 1932. Syria in 1946. The borders of Jordan were established in 1946, and Kuwait did not come into being until 1961. The point is, if those Arabic countries around Israel argue that Israel doesn't belong there because it's only a recent resident of the land, then they would have to discount their own rights as recent states, because none of them existed as countries until the 20th century. Those nations were all under the control of the Turkish Ottoman Empire. So none of the other nations in that region have a long-standing claim to that land. But the Jewish people do. And it is so unfortunate that most people don't understand that. Helen Thomas, now deceased, was an author and member of the White House Press Corps and opinion columnist. She worked for the United Press International for 57 years. She covered the administrations of 11 U.S. presidents, from the Eisenhower administration to the Obama administration, first term. She was considered iconic in the field of journalism. In 2010, a rabbi named David Nesanoff questioned Thomas as she left the White House. He asked her for some comments on the Israeli-Palestinian matter. And she responded, quote, "Tell them," meaning tell the Israelis, "to get the blank out of Palestine." She continued, "Remember, those people," meaning the Palestinians, "are occupied. And it's their land. It's not German, it's not Poland." The rabbi asked then, all right, if the Israelis should get out of Palestine, then where should the Israeli Jewish population go? And she responded, the Jews could, quote, "go home to Poland or Germany or the United States and anywhere else." But, she continued, why push people out of there who have lived there for centuries? Miss Thomas did not understand that the only people that have been there for all these centuries have been the Jewish people. She admitted at the end of that conversation that she was of Arab descent. I don't know if that might have influenced her bias. Number 4, the humanitarian reason. Israel has a right to the land on the grounds of humanitarian concern. In the almost 19 centuries prior to the establishment of Israel as a state, meaning people from 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem and the dismantling of Israel as a nation, from 70 AD until 1948, and at some point in time I will tell you the miraculous story how God used a president named Harry S. Truman from a suburb of Kansas City, the only president who never graduated from college. I lived 11 miles from him as I was growing up. God used Harry S. Truman to bring that nation into existence. It is a miraculous story. It happened in 1948. And for those 19 centuries that Israel was not a nation, the Jewish people had been scattered across this globe throughout that time. And the Jewish people had endured 80 major expulsions from different countries in Europe. Jews were expelled from Great Britain, France, Austria, Lithuania, Spain, Portugal, Bohemia, Moravia, and 72 other countries. In addition to the horrific German Holocaust that exterminated more than 6 million of them, If the Jewish people have a right to exist as a people group, if the Jewish people have a right to exist as a political state, then the Jewish people have a right to a homeland. So if we're not going to permit them a homeland in the Middle East, please tell me, where is that homeland going to be? What other nation on this earth is going to donate some of its own land to a Jewish state? Israel has never asked for that much. But remember that until the Jews returned to Israel, until the Jewish people revitalized that land, no one else wanted it. Number 5 is the ally reason. The ally reason. Israel is the only democracy in that entire region. And so we should hope and pray that Israel is able to maintain its land and statehood, because she is a strategic friend of the United States. Whether we understand it or not, people, Israel is an impediment to Islamic groups and Islamic governments that are hostile to democracies such as ours. And Israel has prevented those groups and those governments and those countries from taking complete control of the Middle East. It is a blessing to know that the U.S. has a true friend in the Middle East. The fact is, Israel votes with the United States in the United Nations more than England, more than Canada, more than France, more than Germany. Israel votes beside the United States in the United Nations more than any other nation. Israel has continued to be a friend to the United States, and to use the language of Facebook, we dare not defriend Israel, because to do so would be to invite the judgment of God upon this nation. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary of State, Mr. Secretary of Defense, Mr. Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staffs, members of Congress, both House and Senate, and countless more who are responsible to effect foreign policy. Please remember what God said to Abraham as part of the Abrahamic covenant, Genesis 12 and verse 3. God said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. And that divine curse might come in the form of terrorism, and there is biblical precedent to support that. Throughout the Old Testament, divine curse and judgment on disobedient Israel often came in the form of an invasion and terrorist acts from foreign nations. And people, that could happen to us. We are not immune to that. Remember, Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, Muslim Brotherhood, ISIS, and Hamas all represent the same game, terrorism. All represent the same league, radicalized Islam. Those names just represent different teams, that's all. All of them hate Jewish people. All of them hate Christians. This, quote, religion of peace is now persecuting Christians in 111 countries. Let me preach. They hate Israel. They hate Christians. They hate democracy. They hate the United States. All of them do. And if we don't stand up and we don't take a position, and we don't position ourselves 100% behind Israel, then what is happening there in the Middle East today, God could, in the form of a curse from the Abrahamic covenant, permit to happen here tomorrow.
That's right.
You know, the Bible has a very simple statement. It says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And we should. Let's stand to our feet. Would we bow our heads together? Father, I may only call it as I see it. I've studied this subject, and from my perspective, our Jewish friends are special people to you. Even those who don't understand that your Son was their Messiah. They don't understand it now. They will someday, according to the book of Romans, when your Son returns and they acknowledge their great error and repent and are saved as a nation. But they don't right now. So many of them don't, but we should love them with everything that we have. We should do our best as a people to pray for them and to pray for that special, special nation called Israel, because they are under so much. They're surrounded by people and nations and governments that literally hate them and wanted them exterminated, rubbed off the face of the earth. God, I just pray that this gives us a new perspective on what it's all about. When we hear the news, we hear a lot of misinformation. We need to be able to be discerning and sort through some of these things. And I pray now that we have a biblical grid to be able to do that. I appreciate everyone's patience, and I'm sure this will be followed with much dialogue afterwards in private, but hopefully this gives us a baseline to go from. Again, thank you for your special people and for including us in on the plans you have for them, and for sending your Son Jesus to be a very, very special Jewish carpenter who would someday sacrifice himself for our sins on a cross so that we might have absolute forgiveness and so that we might enjoy heaven forever together with him. Thank you. In his special name I pray. Amen.